SIL kept insulting my husband for being a stay-at-home dad. I snapped and told her how my husband had supported their entire family during hard times, even at our wedding dinner. The backstory here is that I, 28F, and my husband Jason, 29M, met 6 years ago and got married about 3 years ago. We also have a 1-year-old daughter together. We met because of my brother, who's good friends with Jason due to their line of work. Jason used to be a cop, and my brother runs a pizza place which Jason used to visit frequently. They struck up a friendship, and one year my brother brought Jason home for Thanksgiving. That's how we met for the first time, and soon after, I asked him out and we started dating. After being together for 3 years, he proposed and we got married. I had met his family quite a few times before marriage, and most of them were always very warm to me, with the exception of my sister-in-law, Janice, 27F. Even my mother-in-law was pretty nice to me, but she wasn't, for whatever reason. Jason kept telling me that she would come around eventually, but she never did. She never showed her dislike for me outright, and in front of other people either, keeping things subtle, backhanded compliments, insults disguised as jokes, and stuff, the usual. Initially, it really got on my nerves, but after a while, I learned to ignore it because it didn't make sense to give her the satisfaction of letting her get under my skin. She never said anything in front of Jason, probably because she didn't want to risk turning him against her, but he knew about my tension with his sister and made sure I was not left alone with her whenever we visited his family. I didn't want him to cut his family off or even cut his sister off because it wasn't worth it to go to so much trouble just because of a few mean jokes and insults. So, we just dealt with the situation by not dealing with it and letting her say whatever she wanted while I tried my best to ignore it. That's what Jason did as well. It wasn't ideal, but we didn't have much of a choice, so we just had to suck it up and let her continue with her stupid and weird behavior when it came to me, since we wanted to maintain the peace in the family. Thinking back on it, I really wish I had said something and nipped this in the bud instead of being all self-conscious and afraid to speak up for myself. I just didn't want to be labeled as that woman who gets mad at every little thing and breaks up families. That's why I stayed quiet for a long time, but I just couldn't anymore after what happened recently. Jason was a cop, but he quit the force a few months ago because he wanted to be a stay-at-home dad. I'm a working mother, and I don't have an easy job. I'm a trauma surgeon. We have a daughter, and we were really struggling with how to make this work-life balance arrangement work. Of course, both of us have high-pressure jobs and couldn't exactly afford to spend much time at home. We did have daycare, and our parents would take care of our daughter whenever we needed them to, but it wasn't good enough for us. We were missing out on spending time with her, and it felt like she was going to grow up without her parents around much if we kept going that way. So about a year ago, Jason and I had a serious conversation about this, and he told me that he was going to quit the force to spend more time with our daughter at home. I didn't force him into making that decision, but he made it for himself because I made more money than him, and he believed that it was only fair that he quit his job so our daughter would have at least one of us around for most of the day. Asked him if he was sure about that probably thousands of times before I was finally convinced that he actually wanted to go through with this and become a full-time dad. It was a huge step to take, and I knew how much my husband enjoyed being a cop, so I wanted to make sure that he wouldn't resent me for this. But I don't think he would because he seems more than happy to spend his days taking care of the household and our daughter. The last time we spoke about this was just a few weeks ago, and he told me that initially he had found it a little difficult to adjust to being a stay-at-home dad after working for so many years. But with time, it became easier for him because he could spend time with our daughter. He seems quite content with his life and how everything has turned out for him. He doesn't seem to have any complaints because he says his dream job used to be being a cop, but now it's being a father, and that's pretty beautiful. His family, however, doesn't see any beauty in the situation, and I should have seen it coming because his family is pretty traditional. They do allow women to work, and most of the women in his family are working women, but the catch is that they don't allow their men to work at home. None of the men in my husband's family even touch the household chores because they consider it beneath their dignity. So eventually, the women in their families end up doing the household work along with their jobs, or they are forced to quit their jobs, like my mother-in-law. The crazy part is that they don't even see anything wrong with this arrangement and think it's completely fine. Jason and I have discussed this in person, and both of us agree that it's a ridiculous school of thought, but we never spoke about it with his family because they would just come out with some stupid arguments to cover up the misogyny, and we didn't want to get into that. If they were happy living their life that way, then who are we to judge them for it? Thankfully, Jason and I always split everything equally, and sometimes he would even do more of the household work than me in case I ended up working late. Now, of course, he's doing everything at home and holding down the fort there while I bring home the money to us. It doesn't really matter who does what as long as we're all happy and healthy and there's food on the table. His parents and sister, however, strongly disagree with this and are very upset with Jason's decision to quit the force and stay at home with our daughter. They think it makes him less of a man or whatever and have been arguing with him for months about it. I tried to intervene at first, but his parents made it very clear that my interference would only make their relationship worse. Jason didn't want me to come to his defense either because he didn't want to involve me in this mess, so I stayed out of their way. It took them a while, but they did come around to our new arrangement and haven't brought it up for quite a few months. It also probably helped that they had new things to think about, like Janice getting married. Her boyfriend of 2 years, Harry, 27M, proposed to her, and after that, everybody pretty much forgot about Jason because this was a much bigger deal. We were thankful that they chose to get engaged around that time because it really helped take the heat off of us for a few months. Nobody from his family brought up Jason's decision to quit the force or try to fight him on it. We were quite relieved because we thought this had finally blown over and we wouldn't have to hear about a man's role in his family ever again. But then, Janice held her rehearsal dinner yesterday, and that's where this came up again. So, I had a bit of an outburst. Janice is getting married in 1 day, so this is a bit of an emergency, and we need to figure out what we want to do about this really quickly. This is time sensitive, so we would appreciate a fast response to this post. While we were at dinner, Jason and I were sitting opposite Janice and Harry. Their parents and a couple of other family members were also sitting around us, and we were all having a normal, fun chat. Nothing too controversial. I was relieved that we were finally getting along with his family like before. It was a big deal, especially after how upset everybody had been when Jason quit the force. I didn't think this would happen again, but then Janice decided to go off topic and started asking me how my work was going. I felt uncomfortable, but I had to answer the question because it was a very normal and innocent question in itself, but I knew where she was about to take it. I told her that my work was great and left it at that, hoping she would take the hint and not drag this out. But then she asked Jason how his work was going and cracked a joke about how his job finally allows him to take time off without worrying about anything because now his life is just a long vacation since he is living off of my income. She didn't stop there and went on to say that at least now it's clear to everybody who wears the pants in our family. She cracked a few more jokes that were pretty below the belt and kept making fun of Jason while he quietly tried to ignore it and smile through it all, trying to take it like a sport. But I couldn't handle it, and I just lost control. It was probably years of her getting on my nerves and months of having to deal with Jason's family and their annoying beliefs. Something in me just snapped, and I decided to bring up something that nobody wanted to hear. I told her that she could crack as many jokes as she wanted, but Jason had been the one to help pay for their entire wedding. His family had no idea about this because they'd been out of the loop for months. They didn't even know that Jason had been giving his sister thousands of dollars for wedding expenses. He didn't want to tell anybody about this, but he felt obligated to help out because he was part of the family. He was the one who stepped in to help pay for Janice's wedding because their parents weren't able to pitch in. Jason paid for her wedding dress, the catering, and even gave her the cash she asked for when she ran out of money for her reception. This was the last straw for Janice, who didn't know how to respond to that. There was complete silence at the table for a few seconds, but after that, she just left the dinner table. Her family ended up rushing to support her, but I could tell they were all shocked. Janice has never been told off before, so this was probably a huge hit to her pride. Her family was upset, and they all left the dinner early. Janice stormed off, and her family immediately followed, leaving the dinner table in awkward silence. I could feel the tension in the air. Jason looked at me with a mix of shock and relief, but mostly gratitude. He didn't say anything at first, but I could tell he appreciated me standing up for him. We sat there, surrounded by the awkward aftermath, as everyone else tried to act normal, but the atmosphere was thick with discomfort. After a few minutes, Jason leaned in and whispered, "I can't believe you said that." He smiled faintly. I never wanted anyone to know about the money, especially not her. I sighed, looking around at the empty chairs. I know, but it had to be said. I'm tired of her treating you like you're beneath her, because you decided to take care of our daughter. That's not fair to you, and it's not fair to us. He nodded, his gaze softening. Thanks for saying something. I don't know if it will change anything, but it felt good to finally speak the truth. It was a small moment of relief, but the bigger storm was still coming. Janice's family didn't take the news well. Her mother, in particular, was furious. We tried to stay as calm as possible, but I knew the situation was far from over. The next few days were filled with calls from Jason's family. They didn't know how to process the fact that Jason had been quietly supporting Janice's wedding behind their backs. His parents were upset, shocked that Jason, the man who had chosen to leave his job to stay at home, was the one who had financially supported their daughter's big day. They had never understood Jason's decision, but now they were faced with the reality that he had been playing a much bigger role in the family than they had acknowledged. The phone calls were exhausting. Jason's father accused him of undermining their traditional values, while his mother scolded him for not acting like a man and for letting me wear the pants in the family. They were angry at me, too, blaming me for influencing Jason's decision to stay home and take care of our daughter. To them, it was unthinkable that a man could be the primary caregiver, and it seemed to shatter everything they had believed in. Through it all, Jason remained calm. He listened to his family's arguments, but he didn't engage in their guilt trips or shame. He simply said, "This is the life I want, and I'm happy with it. I'm doing this for our daughter, and that's all that matters." His sister, Janice, didn't reach out to apologize. I didn't expect her to. I think the truth hit her harder than she let on. She had never been in a situation where someone had stood up to her, especially not her own brother. But I knew deep down that this was a turning point for both of us. I wasn't going to let anyone, family or not, belittle Jason or the choices we made together. A week later, Jason received a call from his mother, asking if we could all sit down and talk. She said she wanted to understand his decision better and was willing to try to put the past behind them. At that moment, I knew this conversation would be crucial, not just for Jason and his family, but for our own relationship moving forward. When we met up, things were still tense, but Jason's parents seemed genuinely open to listening. They asked him about his feelings on quitting the police force, about his new role as a stay-at-home dad, and about how he saw the future. He told them honestly, explaining how much he loved spending time with our daughter, how fulfilling it was to see her grow every day. He also spoke about how difficult it had been to make that decision, and how much support he needed from me to make it work. His mother, still unsure, asked, "But don't you feel like you're missing out on something? Like being a man in the family?" Jason responded firmly, "I'm not missing out on anything. Being a father is the most important job I could have. I'm doing what's right for my family, and that's enough for me." There was a long pause. His father, who had been silent through most of the conversation, finally spoke up. "I don't agree with your choice, but I respect that you're doing what you believe is best for your family." His words were reluctant, but they were the closest to an apology we were going to get. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Jason's family wasn't going to change overnight, and I knew that. But seeing them try to understand, even if only a little bit, made me feel like we were moving in the right direction. It wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was a beginning. A way for Jason to reclaim his place in the family on his own terms. As for Janice, she never spoke to me directly about the wedding finances. She continued to avoid the topic, but I could tell she was embarrassed by the truth. Maybe, in time, she would come to see things differently. But for now, I was content knowing that we had finally drawn the line. Jason wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how close, disrespect him or our family. I looked at Jason after the meeting, feeling a quiet sense of pride. He had stood his ground, and in doing so, he had shown me and his family the kind of man he truly was, not defined by outdated expectations, but by his love for us, his dedication to our daughter, and his unwavering support for our family. And for me, that was more than enough.